Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I thought we'd talk about mash tun design, and there's a lot of ways that one can put together a mash tun. I started out with a standard modified cooler, plastic cooler. I think that's what a lot of all grain brewers start out with. Um, Most of the things I'm going to show today can also be done uh, with that type of configuration, just a simple plastic cooler. You don't necessarily have to have a nice stainless steel vessel. And really, the benefit that stainless steel gives you is ease of keeping it clean. Plastic gets scratched, stuff gets in there. But with a mash tun, that's not quite as important as, say, a fermenter, where after the mash, you still are going to pasteurize, boil the wort. So, plastic mash tuns, you can definitely get by with one, especially with the right design, not going to suffer too many negative impacts. So, here's my mash tun. Uh, Stainless steel, of course, and it's not pretty, but it's very functional. Stuff I have over it is an automotive insulation. It's pretty inexpensive, and you kind of wrap it and then some thermal tape to close the seams with. And point out a couple things. This is a cam lock attachment. These are nice because they're also stainless steel. Uh, as long as you keep them clean, they'll stay relatively sanitized just by the heat that's flowing through them. Or you can pump hot water ahead of time to pre-sanitize the fitting. That's a lot harder to do with plastic. There are similar things, plastic quick disconnects that I used for a long time. I think a lot of people still use them, and they're okay, but they have these annoying things on the outlet that, that pieces of grain can get caught on. They're harder to keep clean, and they get scratched up. Sometimes they get really sticky, and it's hard to remove the hose from them. These are really nice. They don't suffer any of those downsides. Even if they get kind of sticky, just by the differences in design, the hoses are still very easy to remove, and they're standard ball valve. And then up here we have the thermowell. Again, I have an electric brewery, and you can actually see the wires for the probes over here. The probes just plug into this thermowell, and then we get constant, fairly accurate temperature readings. Okay, so the next thing we'll show, get a bit closer here on these fittings so you can see them a little better. Uh, Actually, up here on the thermowell, you can see that I have some thermal paste on there. I find that that really does make a difference. Getting a really nice connection with your temperature probe with some thermal paste in that thermowell really does make the probe more responsive, and you have less risk of blowing past a temperature and getting an accurate temperature reading. Here's the inside of the mash tun. So you can see over here we have the other side of the thermowell, and then we have our handle for the false bottom here. And you can see that this particular false bottom is pretty coarse. It's not extremely fine in terms of the hole size. And there's also a fair amount of slop in the sense that it doesn't fit extremely tightly against the edge of the mash tun. I've seen some designs that actually have like rubber gaskets that fit around the edge. Uh, I find that I really have no issues with grain slipping past these edges. It's just not a problem that has come up at all. So I don't think having a gasket or anything fancy there is really all that necessary. The only exception might be is that you might get some extra flow along the edges depending on the design of other things, and that might hurt your efficiency. But we'll talk more about that in a second. So this is with the false bottom removed, and this is my sparge manifold or mash tun manifold, and this is stuff called loc-line, and I think this stuff is great. You'll see it again before the video is over for another piece of the mash tun. Now, for more information on manifolds, John Palmer's How to Brew has an appendix that talks about this quite a bit and talks about flow dynamics when you have outlets in different places in the mash tun. If you have the outlet only over here and have really no manifold at all, then you're going to get a lot of flow just around the edges of the mash. You're not going to get very, and maybe kind of just straight down the middle. You're not going to get very consistent flow through the whole grain bed with lauter and sparge, and that's going to impact your efficiency. So what I wanted to do is build a better manifold. My first idea was to have these end caps here closed. That actually didn't work that well. I seemed like I had trouble priming the pump basically. And I think what was going on is air kind of got trapped in here. And just through the little holes, it had a hard time clearing out the air bubbles that were in there, and that prevented the pump from priming. Standard brewing pumps can't self-prime. They can't move air. They can only move fluid. So if you have air in there, it just won't work. But once I took the end caps off of these, then it worked fine. Of course, most of the flow is going to be coming from these 3 points, but this works out really well for me. I mean, I've been getting efficiencies into the high 70s and low 80s, like 80% efficiency, as long as I do other things properly, like keep the grain bed nice and fluffy with the right amount of water. I usually fly sparge, so since I also step mash, I do relatively thin mashes to avoid compacting the bed due to all the recirculation through the mash tun. And also for recirculation, I think this helps because this adds a little more resistance to the system, and that'll slow down your recirculation and cut down the risk of compacting the bed. So this is on the top left of my mash tun, and this is basically the return port for step mash recirculation as well as sparging, lautering. Again, we have the cam lock here that makes it really convenient to pull the hose on and off. And I drilled this myself. It's actually not very difficult to drill through thin stainless steel. You just need to go get a special drill bit. And then on the other side here, this handy stuff, again, is the loc-line. Same stuff that we just got done looking at, just a different color. This is a continuation of the recirculation and sparge arm. And so this is pretty gentle. On here, we actually do have an end cap on. So the fluid is only coming out through the smaller holes. So that gives a nice gentle recirculation that doesn't upset the grain bed. And I find this works really nicely. It's adjustable, so as the volume in your mash tun varies from batch to batch, it's really easy to just adjust this arm with your hands And I like to get mine just under the fluid level so that you're actually pumping back underneath the top of the mash. So what happens is I pump out of the bottom of the mash tun, the valve is below the false bottom, through the manifold, and then that pumps through a coil inside my hot liquor tank. I have a what they call a HERM system, and that hot liquor tank is about 8 degrees above the target temperature that I'm trying to get the mash to. So the wort will circulate through that coil and then return through this arm. And again, this is always positioned just slightly below the top of the fluid level. So that will continue along, and the temperature of the mash tun will slowly rise up to my target temperature. Then when I switch over to sparging, I move some hoses around a bit because I'm going from out from my mash tun into the kettle. But then I'm still using this arm to introduce hot water, sparge water from the hot liquor tank into the very top of the mash for fly sparging. One thing I'll add about the loc-line is these things do crack after a while. So you want to make sure and get some extra pieces just in case one cracks. They normally don't crack catastrophically to where you can't, you can finish the batch at least. But they do wear out, and you want to have some replacement pieces on hand. Yeah, so that's about it. That's my mash tun. Um, Again, I think you can do a lot of these modifications even with a plastic cooler style mash tun. You can still build a manifold, which is going to help you a lot. You probably could still build in even a thermal well and a recirculation return by drilling a couple holes. It might be a little trickier just because the plastic is going to be harder to actually hold whatever type of mount you put in there, but I think you could find a way to get it done. One other thing I'd like to add is just a brief point on other materials people might use to build out their mash tun. Food grade plastics and stainless steel are both fine. Do avoid copper to some degree. Copper can be okay in small amounts if it really is just copper, but really avoid brass. A lot of brass does have some amount of lead in it, and as the coating on the brass deteriorates, it can leach a small amount of lead. There's no safe amount of lead, so we really don't want that in our beer. Uh, other hardware store parts like galvanized, that can have some similar issues. So really stick to stainless steel or food grade plastic. These are the things that are safe to use in contact with your beer. Yeah, that's really about it. Remember to click subscribe, please, and I will see everybody for the next episode. Cheers.